It was a late summer afternoon in Savannah, Georgia, warm, sticky, and still. The kind of southern afternoon where everything moves a little slower, the light filters through the trees in golden sheets, and the air hums with cicadas and distant traffic. On the edge of a low-income neighborhood known as Westfield Terrace, life on September 15, 2011, moved on with its usual sleepy rhythm. But for one little girl, that day would become her final thread connecting her to the world. 8-year-old Madison Leigh stood on tiptoe, clutching the black plastic receiver of a public payphone outside Trans Corner Market, a family-owned Vietnamese grocery store where her mother once worked. She was wearing faded blue jeans, a soft yellow t-shirt with a picture of a duckling on the front, and well-worn pink sandals that had begun to fray along the edges. Her backpack, too large for her narrow frame, slouched against the wall beside her. The coins clinked into the slot. She dialed slowly and with confidence. She had memorized her mother's number by heart. "Mom," her voice chirped, light and clear through the static hum. "Hi, it's me. Did you get to Tampa okay?" On the other end of the line, 31-year-old Kara Lee pressed the phone tighter against her cheek as she stepped out into the hospital parking lot in Florida, shielding her eyes from the brightness. She had just finished feeding her ailing father, who had been battling terminal liver failure. When she heard her daughter's voice, Kara's face broke into a tired, loving smile. "Hey, baby girl." "I did. Just got done with Grandpa," Kara replied. "How was school?" Madison launched into her usual enthusiastic rundown. A math quiz she thought she did well on, the lunch lady giving her an extra pudding cup, and a boy in her class who accidentally glued his finger to his desk during art class. Kara laughed and let her daughter talk, savoring every moment of the conversation. Then Madison's tone shifted, just slightly. "I was wondering if you could maybe get me a new pair of sandals? Mine are kind of falling apart," she said quietly. Kara's chest tightened. It wasn't the request. She would have bought her daughter new shoes in a heartbeat. It was how gently Madison had asked, like she didn't want to be a burden. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll pick them up tomorrow and bring them when I come home," Kara promised. "And you wanted that little English dictionary too, right? For your class project?" "Yes. That one with the buttons that can talk." Madison giggled. "You're the best, Mom." They talked for 6 minutes. Just 6. As the sun began to dip behind the rooftops of Savannah, Kara told her daughter she loved her and to be patient. She might need one more day in Tampa before coming back. "Oh, Mom," Madison said. "I'll be good. I love you." And then the line went quiet. That call would be the last time Kara ever heard her daughter's voice. Around 2:30 p.m., when Madison still hadn't returned to the apartment behind the market, her babysitter, an elderly neighbor named Mrs. Loretta, began to grow uneasy. Madison had told her she'd be gone just a minute to make a quick phone call. That was nearly an hour ago. Mrs. Loretta checked the corner store first. No Madison. She walked to the payphone, empty. She circled the block. Checked the church steps where Madison sometimes sat to draw with sidewalk chalk. Nothing. An eerie chill gripped her, despite the heat. She hurried back home and started calling friends, then neighbors. Panic began to spread. By 4 p.m., a small group of residents had already begun combing the neighborhood. Some walked, others drove slowly through alleyways and back roads, calling her name. "Madison. Maddie honey. It's Loretta. Time to come home now." No answer. Just silence, the kind that settles like dust when something goes terribly wrong. At 4:45 p.m., Loretta called 911. When Officer Raymond Dillard arrived at the scene 15 minutes later, the worry on the neighbors' faces had curdled into dread. The officer interviewed Loretta, who explained the situation in detail: the call, the delay, Madison's independent but careful nature. Madison was known to be mature beyond her years. She made her own after-school snacks, handled her homework with little help, and rarely strayed far from home. "She's a good girl," Loretta kept saying. "Not the kind to wander off." That statement would become a bitter refrain over the coming days. By early evening, a BOLO, be on the lookout, alert was issued across the state. Police canvassed the market, questioned shop owners, and pulled security camera footage from nearby businesses. They noted Madison's last known outfit and her usual walking path home. They didn't find any footage of her after she left the payphone. Meanwhile, 400 miles away in Tampa, Kara Leigh collapsed to her knees in the hospital lobby when a Savannah detective called to tell her, "We believe your daughter is missing." She dropped everything, booked the earliest flight she could afford, and arrived back in Savannah the following morning. By then, dozens of volunteers had joined the search. Local churches organized community patrols. An anonymous donor printed 10,000 flyers with Madison's school photo, her brown eyes wide and curious, her smile faint but pure. Kara, disheveled and sleepless, walked every block herself. Holding her daughter's plush duck toy in one hand and the printed flyer in the other, she knocked on doors, talked to strangers, climbed dumpsters, peered into drainage ditches, and refused to rest. "Have you seen my daughter?" she asked again and again. "Her name is Madison. She's 8. Some people stared. Some helped. Some cried. None had seen her. By the second night, local news stations had picked up the story. By the third, it was national. "Missing girl in Savannah" ran across CNN's bottom ticker. Hashtags flooded Twitter. People from as far as Chicago mailed care packages and flashlight donations to aid search crews. And yet, Madison remained missing. The golden, syrupy afternoon light of Savannah faded into heavy rain clouds as the search stretched into its 4th day. Hope remained, but it began to crack. Because deep down, many started to wonder, how does an 8-year-old girl vanish in broad daylight, in her own neighborhood, without anyone seeing? And if someone had taken her, why hadn't they called? Long before the headlines and the flyers, long before Madison Leigh's name became synonymous with tragedy, she was just a little girl who lived quietly in a small, cramped apartment above a corner market. The apartment wasn't much. Just 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a single window that overlooked a narrow alley where delivery trucks rumbled in and out all day. The walls were thin and yellowed. The old carpet smelled faintly of ginger and garlic, leftovers from the market's back kitchen below. But to Madison, it was home. She'd spent nearly 3 years there with her mother, Kara, building a life that may not have been perfect, but was stable, filled with routines and dreams whispered over dollar store dinner plates. Kara Leigh, 31, had grown up on the other side of the country in Spokane, Washington. She was the product of a fractured home, her mother an alcoholic, her father a shadow. She left at 17 with nothing but a duffel bag and a dream to start over somewhere warm. Savannah was supposed to be temporary, a pit stop. But after Madison was born, it became permanent. Kara took any job she could find: waitressing, warehouse work, food delivery. For a time, she worked at Transmarket, the same Vietnamese-owned grocery store where Madison would later make her last phone call. The owner, Mr. Duay Tran, had offered her flexible hours and a small space above the shop in exchange for help cleaning and stocking during night shifts. It wasn't ideal, but it gave Kara the one thing she needed most: a chance to be near her daughter. Madison learned early how to be independent. She knew how to make instant oatmeal, how to fold laundry, how to memorize her address in case she ever got lost. While other kids her age were still wetting the bed or refusing vegetables, Madison was helping count change at the market register and organizing canned goods by expiration date. The other shopkeepers in the neighborhood, Mr. Chun the butcher, Miss Gloria from the bakery, old Father Coltrane from the church down the block, they all knew her by name. "She's sharp, that one," they'd say. "Too smart for her own good." But with that maturity came a quiet loneliness. There weren't many kids in the block. Most families had moved to newer parts of town. Madison didn't complain, but Kara could see it in her daughter's eyes sometimes, when she watched other kids at the park from a distance, or when she quietly played jacks alone on the kitchen floor. To fill the silence, Madison turned to stories. She read everything: fairy tales, mystery novels, school science books. Her favorites were Nancy Drew and anything with animals that talked. Sometimes she'd climb the fire escape and read under the stars, whispering lines to herself, mouthing big words like archaeologist and photosynthesis with careful precision. But she didn't just want to read about the world. She wanted to see it. She told her mom she wanted to be a teacher, or maybe a vet, or maybe a scientist who worked somewhere cold with penguins. Kara would smile and say, "You can be anything, Mads. Anything at all." And Madison believed her. But as strong as their bond was, it wasn't unbreakable. Kara had made some difficult choices, some born out of desperation, others out of exhaustion. When her father, who had long been estranged, was diagnosed with terminal liver failure in Tampa, she knew she had to go. He was the only blood relative left, and deep down, a part of her needed closure. Madison begged to go along, but Kara couldn't afford to pull her from school or buy an extra bus ticket. So she made a plan: leave Madison with their neighbor, Loretta, for 3 days, just 3, and come right back. Kara left on a Tuesday morning. By Wednesday, Madison was making her own breakfast again, brushing her own hair, doing her homework at the kitchen table just like always. And then Thursday came. September 15th. The last call. After her disappearance, investigators began piecing together everything about Madison's life: her daily routines, her favorite foods, who she talked to, where she played. They interviewed teachers at Westwood Elementary who described her as quiet but sweet. They talked to the market owners, who remembered her coming in for fruit snacks and sometimes just to chat. They tracked down her librarian, who said Madison checked out 2 books every week without fail, 1 fiction, 1 science. Detectives sifted through her bedroom. It was modest but neat. A twin bed with a faded cartoon bedspread. A whiteboard filled with hand-drawn penguins and dream job checklists. Teacher, scientist, detective. A shoebox under her bed with her treasures. A glow-in-the-dark keychain, a seashell, a picture of her and Kara at the beach. One officer, seasoned and tough, reportedly teared up when he found the little journal Madison had kept, complete with stick figure drawings and entries like, "Today I helped Mrs. Gloria carry boxes. She said I'm strong. I like being strong." The community response was swift and sincere. Dozens of volunteers joined the search. Churches opened their doors for prayer vigils. A retired Marine offered his drone equipment to help scan the surrounding woods. Candlelight vigils lit up the park 3 nights in a row. But despite the momentum, leads were thin. No ransom calls. No eyewitnesses. No usable footage. The payphone Madison had used was old, disconnected from modern security systems. The security camera outside Transmarket? Broken for months. The only thing left was a faint timestamp of 2:23 p.m., Madison inserting coins, dialing, talking. Then stepping away and disappearing out of frame. Her school reported no incidents. Her teachers were baffled. Even Loretta, guilt-ridden and broken, swore she only let Madison walk to the phone because it was literally just around the corner. The only pattern detectives found? Madison was often alone. And then a name began to emerge, one that hadn't been on the radar at first: Ethan Brooks. A delivery man for the produce supplier who serviced Transmarket and others nearby. He'd seen Madison around. He'd been friendly. Too friendly, some began to say. And just like that, suspicion began to form a shape. But no one imagined just how dark that shape would become. The first time Kara met Ethan Brooks, she didn't think much of him. He was just another delivery guy, one of the many who dropped off boxes of produce, dry goods, and bottled water at Transmarket 3 times a week. Early 20s, tall, shaggy brown hair tucked under a baseball cap, with a polite but quiet demeanor. He rarely made eye contact, spoke in short phrases, and always wore earbuds in one ear, nodding along to music only he could hear. If he hadn't worn the company logo on his shirt, you might have thought he was just another kid loitering out back. To Kara, he was harmless, distant, forgettable. But to Madison, he was curious. Children have a peculiar sense for reading people, sometimes sharper than adults, sometimes completely off. Madison had seen Ethan plenty of times. When she was younger, she'd wave from the apartment window as he unloaded boxes onto the metal cart, struggling with the weight. Sometimes he'd glance up and wave back, just once, then return to work. One Saturday, when Madison was 7, she offered him a cold bottle of water from the market fridge. It was over 90 degrees that day and he was dripping with sweat. He looked at her, stunned for a second, then took the bottle. "Thanks," he muttered almost shyly. From then on, he started calling her Maddie. He'd joke that she was stronger than he was, and once let her sit on the driver's seat of the truck while it was parked, pretending she was the boss. Kara found this endearing at the time. Her daughter didn't have many adult male figures in her life. Madison's biological father had vanished before her second birthday, off somewhere in Nevada, last she heard. So when a harmless delivery guy treated her kindly, Kara saw it as nothing more than a gentle kindness from a young man with a tough job. He even gave Madison a book once, The Secret of the Old Clock, a well-worn Nancy Drew paperback he said he found while cleaning out his apartment. "Too smart for cartoons," he told her. "You're more like a detective, huh?" Madison beamed for days. After her disappearance, investigators compiled a list of everyone who might have had contact with Madison in the days leading up to September 15th. Ethan's name didn't jump out immediately. He wasn't a family member, a neighbor, or even a close friend. But he was consistent. According to delivery records, he'd been at Trans Market every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday for nearly a year. Detective Simone Harper was the first to raise a flag. She noticed that Ethan had been scheduled for a Thursday afternoon drop, the exact day Madison disappeared. But when she called his employer, she learned something odd. Ethan never returned the truck that evening. It was brought back at 11:15 p.m., nearly 6 hours late. His explanation? Truck trouble on I-95. There was no record of any calls made for roadside assistance. No police reports. No receipts for repairs. It wasn't enough to prove guilt, but it was enough to warrant a closer look. When detectives visited his last known address, a rundown duplex near the industrial district, he wasn't home. His roommate said he hadn't seen Ethan since early Saturday. That was nearly 2 days after Madison vanished. A bolo went out the next morning. Ethan Brooks wasn't an easy man to find. He had no social media, no credit cards, no driver's license activity after the 15th. It wasn't until a gas station clerk in Chattanooga, Tennessee, recognized him from a news report that the pieces fell into place. He looked nervous, the clerk told reporters. Paid in cash. Kept looking at the door. When police picked him up 2 hours later, Ethan didn't resist. He didn't ask why. He didn't cry. He simply said, "Am I under arrest?" Back in Savannah, Kara was sitting in a folding chair outside the local sheriff's office when she got the call. A suspect had been apprehended. A man she knew. Her stomach turned. "Not Ethan," she whispered to herself. "He's just a delivery guy." But in the interrogation room, Ethan's behavior cracked. At first, he claimed innocence. He'd seen Madison that day, yes. Gave her a mango, her favorite fruit. Told her to go home. That's all. He denied ever going near her again. Then came the second round of questioning. "I didn't mean for anything bad to happen," he said quietly. Detectives leaned in. She was playing in the storage area. I told her not to. But she didn't listen. So I tried to scare her a little. Tie her hands. Just as a joke. His eyes darted between the two detectives. His fingers picked at the hem of his shirt. His voice dropped to a whisper. But then she started choking. Like having a seizure or something. I panicked. "What did you do next, Ethan?" "I don't remember. I tried to help. I put her on her side. She wasn't moving. I thought she was gone." He refused to say more. No confession of violence. No clear explanation. But his silence was louder than any words. 2 days later, based on Ethan's direction, officers found a patch of disturbed earth near a cluster of pine trees in a state park just outside Dalton, Georgia. Beneath the soil, in a soggy cardboard box, wrapped in multiple layers of plastic, lay the remains of Madison Leigh. Her body was badly decomposed. But her clothes were missing. Her wrists showed signs of ligature marks. There was bruising on her scalp and signs of asphyxiation. The medical examiner would later confirm Madison had died from acute airway obstruction, with additional trauma suggesting possible physical and sexual assault. Back in the interrogation room, when confronted with these findings, Ethan began to cry. "I didn't mean it," he repeated. "I didn't mean it." But no one believed him anymore. It was a quiet, gray morning when the search team entered Pine Ridge State Park just outside of Dalton, Georgia. The air smelled of wet earth and pine needles, and a low mist clung stubbornly to the forest floor. State investigators, dressed in dark windbreakers and gloves, followed behind a silent Ethan Brooks, who led them along an unmarked trail branching off a maintenance road. 2 officers flanked him, one in front, one behind. Ethan didn't speak. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His boots sank slightly into the damp soil with each reluctant step. It took them nearly 20 minutes to reach the spot. There, Ethan mumbled, pointing toward a clump of overgrown ferns and a half-rotted log. Behind that, the box. No one moved for a few seconds. Then, slowly, one officer stepped forward and peeled back the brush. What they saw was sickening. A large cardboard box, battered, damp, sagging from rain, was nestled in a shallow trench, barely covered with a thin layer of loose dirt and pine mulch. The seams had been sealed with thick layers of silver duct tape. One corner had split open from exposure, and a foul-smelling, viscous fluid was leaking through. The officers didn't speak. They didn't need to. The box was carefully removed and placed into a secure evidence container. Forensic technicians wore double gloves and surgical masks as they began the methodical process of opening it at the county morgue. The atmosphere was clinical, but tense. Everyone present knew what they were about to see, but no one was prepared for it. Inside, beneath 9 layers of tightly wrapped plastic garbage bags, was the body of a small girl. She was naked, her limbs folded unnaturally. Her skin had turned a pallid, waxy gray. Decomposition had advanced significantly, but certain details remained heartbreakingly recognizable. The curve of her cheekbone, a missing baby tooth, a pink rubber band still tangled in her matted hair. It was, without question, Madison Leigh. Dr. Teresa Monroe, the forensic pathologist in charge, was a seasoned professional. She'd examined hundreds of bodies, murders, overdoses, suicides. But this case haunted her in a way few ever had. The autopsy findings were chilling. Cause of death, acute airway obstruction. Manner of death, homicide. Additional findings. Bruising and abrasion marks consistent with ligature binding on both wrists and ankles. Multiple contusions to the scalp and back of the head. Signs of sexual trauma, including tearing and abrasions in the genital area. Stomach contents revealed partially digested mango, estimated to be consumed less than an hour before death. Vomit residue found in the mouth and trachea. Fecal release consistent with severe distress or convulsions at time of death. The report was as horrifying as it was clear. This was no accident. When shown the autopsy report, Ethan's demeanor shifted from flat denial to vague confusion. He offered a new version of events, his third. "She was playing a game," he said. "We were pretending to be spies. I tied her hands. I thought she'd figure it out, like escape on her own. And then," Detective Harper asked, stone-faced. "She started shaking," he said, "foaming at the mouth. I panicked." "Did you hit her?" "No. I tried to help. I saw a video once. You're supposed to press on the neck to stop seizures. You used your foot, didn't you?" Ethan looked down. "I thought it would work." His voice trailed off. "Then, I didn't mean to hurt her." But the evidence said otherwise. In the wake of the discovery, a full forensic sweep was ordered at Ethan's former delivery truck and his previous apartment. Trace fibers were found, hair matching Madison's DNA embedded in the passenger side carpet. Duct tape from the storage unit where Ethan often parked the truck matched the tape used on the box. A garbage bag roll in his apartment was chemically identical to the layers used in the wrapping. In a grim twist, investigators also found a burned notebook in the fireplace of the duplex. Only a few charred pages remained intact, but one line stood out, scribbled in shaky pencil. "She trusts me too much. It makes it harder." Madison's body was released to her mother 5 days after the discovery. The funeral was held at a small Methodist church in Savannah, the same one where Kara had once picked up donated school supplies for her daughter. Hundreds came. Friends, neighbors, strangers who had joined the search. They brought pink lilies, Hello Kitty figurines, and handwritten letters. Someone left a box of mangoes near the altar. Kara didn't speak. She couldn't. She sat alone in the front pew, clutching Madison's duck plush tightly to her chest, her face carved into a silence that would last for years. Media coverage exploded. National outlets ran with headlines like, "Delivery driver leads police to missing girl's body. Box of secrets found in Georgia woods. Justice for Madison, what went wrong?" Social media lit up in grief and fury. Celebrities tweeted condolences. A petition demanding the death penalty for Ethan Brooks gained 300,000 signatures in 2 days. But not everyone was unified in their outrage. A small, but growing, group online began circulating conspiracy theories, questioning Kara's parenting, speculating whether she had ignored signs, whether she should be investigated too. Rumors spiraled. Why did she leave an 8-year-old alone for days? Did she really not know what Ethan was like? Why was the funeral crowdfunded but her apartment was remodeled? The mourning mother became a subject of scrutiny, gossip, and vilification. Another tragedy born from tragedy. But facts remained. A girl was dead. A man had lied. A box had been buried. And inside that box, along with Madison's broken body, was something invisible but irreversible. The trust of a child betrayed. By the time Ethan Brooks appeared before the bench of the Chatham County Superior Court, the case had already been decided in the court of public opinion. For months, his face had haunted evening news cycles. His mugshot, unshaven, pale, hollow-eyed, had been plastered across every major outlet in America. He was the monster in the delivery truck, the friend who betrayed trust, the man who buried a child in the woods. But the court wasn't swayed by outrage or headlines. It needed evidence. It needed truth. The trial officially began on March 13, 2012, nearly 6 months after Madison Leigh's remains were discovered. Kara Leigh sat in the front row every day, hands clasped in her lap, her eyes fixed straight ahead. She never looked at Ethan, not once. The prosecution's case. Assistant District Attorney Michelle Kravitz opened the trial with a statement that pierced the silence like glass. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was the deliberate torture and murder of an innocent 8-year-old girl who trusted the wrong adult. The prosecution built its case with clinical precision. They presented forensic evidence linking Madison's DNA to Ethan's truck, clothing, and apartment. Digital timestamps showing Ethan's suspicious disappearance and late return of the delivery vehicle. The autopsy report, which concluded Madison died from asphyxiation and sustained physical and sexual trauma. Recovered personal writings, including Ethan's partial journal entry, "She trusts me too much. It makes it harder." Witness testimonies from neighbors, store owners, and delivery supervisors, painting a pattern of Ethan's growing attachment to Madison over several months. The most devastating moment came when Dr. Monroe, the forensic pathologist, took the stand. With deliberate calm, she explained that Madison likely remained conscious for part of the attack. That she may have tried to scream. That she likely felt terror in her final minutes. The courtroom held its breath. A few jurors wiped tears. Kara Leigh remained still, a statue of sorrow. The defense's strategy. Ethan's court-appointed defense team had few options. He'd confessed, partially. The physical evidence was overwhelming. But they clung to 2 key strategies. Mental impairment, lack of intent. Dr. Alan Greaves, a forensic psychiatrist, testified that Ethan displayed symptoms consistent with borderline intellectual functioning and possible schizoid personality traits. His IQ was tested at 76, well below the U.S. average but above the threshold of legal incompetence. Dr. Greaves claimed Ethan had trouble reading social cues, struggled with emotional regulation, and may have misinterpreted play as permission. Then came the second argument, that Madison's death was not premeditated. The defense pointed out, there was no clear motive, no attempt to extract ransom, no signs Ethan tried to dispose of the body in a remote or strategic way. The method of death, asphyxiation by pressure, was clumsy, indicative of panic, not planning. Ethan's attorney, public defender Marcus Hayes, addressed the jury directly. What happened to Madison Leigh was horrifying. No one disputes that. But the law requires us to distinguish between evil and impaired. My client is not a monster. He is a man who made a tragic, irreversible mistake. Crossfire and collapse. But the prosecution hit back hard. Kravitz brought up how Ethan had lied repeatedly to authorities, fled the state and changed his appearance, removed and disposed of Madison's clothing separately, suggesting awareness of evidence and attempts to obstruct justice. And then came the biggest blow. During a cross-examination, Kravitz asked Ethan directly, "Why did you bury her in the forest?" Ethan, voice cracking, replied, "I didn't want her mom to see her like that." The courtroom froze. "You mean you knew how she looked would hurt her mother?" Kravitz pushed. Yes. Which means you understood what you did was wrong?" Silence. "Mr. Brooks." "Yes." That single word sealed his fate. The verdict. On April 2, 2012, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty of aggravated sexual assault. Guilty of unlawful disposal of human remains. Judge Caroline Foster, stern and somber, addressed Ethan directly. "You took the life of a child who trusted you. You violated that trust in the most horrific way possible. And you showed cowardice in trying to cover it up. The court sees no reason for leniency." Sentencing: death by lethal injection. Public reaction. The verdict brought closure, but not peace. Outside the courthouse, supporters of Cara Lee hugged, cried, and lit candles. Across the street, a small group of protesters held signs reading "No to Execution" and "Mental Health Matters." Media commentators debated the ethics of the death penalty. Podcasts dissected the psychological profile of Ethan Brooks. And quietly, in corners of the internet, conspiracy theories resurfaced, some defending Ethan, others blaming Cara. But for Cara Lee, there was no space for noise. She left the courthouse, holding the same stuffed duck that had once belonged to Madison, and walked alone to her car. Justice, in the eyes of the law, had been served. But justice could never bring her daughter back. The trial was over. The monster was caged. The sentence delivered. And yet, for Cara Lee, the nightmare had only begun. For a brief moment, in the days after Ethan Brooks was sentenced to die by lethal injection, there was silence. The media pulled back. The crowd outside the courthouse thinned. Cara, exhausted beyond grief, returned to her small apartment, alone now, emptier than ever. Madison's shoes still sat by the door. Her drawings were still pinned on the fridge. Nothing had moved. But everything had changed. Cara had expected the world to move on. Or at least to leave her alone. It didn't. The first article appeared on a fringe blog site. The title read, "Was Madison Leigh failed by her own mother?" It cited public records. Cara had left her daughter home alone, for extended periods, and had previous run-ins with authorities related to parking violations and failure to report income. The piece speculated, without evidence, that Cara may have known more than she let on, and accused her of being reckless at best, negligent at worst. Within hours, it had 50,000 views. By the end of the week, it was quoted on major platforms. Social media, once filled with messages of sympathy and support, turned acidic. Anonymous accounts posted screenshots of Cara's Facebook profile, accusing her of milking the tragedy. Others questioned how she could afford a renovated apartment just months after her daughter's funeral. Rumors spread that she had pocketed donations from crowdfunding pages. One user wrote, "She's out here cashing in on her daughter's death while playing the victim. Disgusting." Videos surfaced alleging inconsistencies in her public interviews. One TikTok creator claimed that Cara's facial expressions during the trial were too flat to be genuine grief. Another said she lacked maternal instincts. Worst of all were the private messages. Some said she should be prosecuted for neglect. Others said she should have died instead. A few sent her death threats. Cara stopped opening her email. Then came the reporters. They knocked on her door with cameras and questions disguised as compassion. "Do you regret leaving Madison alone that week? What do you say to people who think you were irresponsible? Were there any warning signs you ignored about Ethan Brooks?" She didn't answer. How could she? What words were there for a mother whose daughter had been murdered and was now being blamed for it? Eventually, the local police released a statement defending her. There is no evidence to suggest Ms. Kara Leigh was in any way involved in the disappearance or death of her daughter. She has cooperated fully throughout the investigation. It didn't matter. The court of public opinion had already passed sentence. Not of guilt, but of judgment. And judgment is its own kind of prison. Kara tried to reclaim her life. Briefly, she attempted to return to work, first at the grocery store where it all began, then at a diner across town. Both jobs ended the same way. Whispers. Cold stares. A customer once left a note on her table with the words, "Some people don't deserve second chances." She stopped trying after that. She moved to a smaller town, renting a modest house outside Asheville, North Carolina, under a new last name. Her hair shorter. Her eyes duller. She avoided the internet. Avoided people. But she still went every Sunday to a small church where no one knew her name. She lit a candle for Madison. Every week. Some good did rise from the wreckage. A foundation was started in Madison's name, the Leigh Project, to provide after-school programs for children with working single parents. It offered tutoring, hot meals, and safe supervision until the evening. Kara didn't run it, but she approved the name. Donations poured in, and over time, the project opened branches in 4 states. But even that sparked backlash. She's profiting from guilt, some said. She should be working, not building her martyrdom. Others quietly thanked her. Privately, dozens of parents wrote letters. "My son would have come home to an empty house if not for your program. Your daughter's story saved mine." Kara never replied. She just placed the letters in a shoebox beside Madison's duck plush, both of which she kept in the drawer of her nightstand. In interviews years later, those close to Kara would say the same thing. She never recovered. She never remarried. She never spoke Madison's name aloud again. But every year, on September 15th, she would drive to a quiet hilltop cemetery in Georgia, sit by a modest gray headstone that read, "Madison Leigh, 2003 to 2011. You are loved." And just sit. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes all day. The towns changed. The noise faded. The cameras moved on. But the silence of that hill remained. Years passed. The headlines faded. The petitions slowed. Even Ethan Brooks, once the center of national outrage, became little more than a cautionary footnote in true crime retrospectives. His appeal was denied in 2016. His execution, carried out quietly in 2019, was met with a moment of media attention, then nothing. But for those who had lived the story, survived it, lost through it, it never ended. The corner store where Madison made her final phone call closed down 2 years after the trial. A Vietnamese family tried to reopen it as a deli, but business never recovered. Locals said it felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memory. The payphone was removed. The sidewalk was repaved. But the space it occupied still drew glances from those who remembered. At Westwood Elementary School, a teacher kept a laminated photo of Madison on her bulletin board long after her class had graduated. Beneath it were the words, "You mattered." The pine forest near Dalton where Madison's body had been found was quietly restricted by the state. That trail, the one Ethan had led police down, was sealed, overgrown, and eventually absorbed back into the woods. Nature covered what mankind couldn't bear to face. But echoes don't need a place. They live in the quiet moments. For Kara Leigh, grief never became softer. Only quieter. She lived simply. Paid in cash. Avoided cameras. She never wrote a book, never gave a national interview, never capitalized on what happened. People asked her to speak. She always declined. The only public thing she did, if you could call it that, was the annual letter. Every year, on September 15th, she would leave a folded envelope on the front steps of the Leigh Project's main office. The foundation staff knew never to open it. They simply placed it in a sealed archive drawer labeled for M. Inside each letter was a single page. Sometimes a poem. Sometimes a prayer. Sometimes just 3 words. "I miss you." What Madison Leigh left behind wasn't just trauma. She left a question, one that refused to be answered. How can something so evil happen to someone so good? Journalists tried to answer it. Psychologists tried to map it. Commentators tried to weaponize it. But the truth was never as clean or comforting as they hoped. There was no grand conspiracy, no fumbled investigation, no second suspect lurking in the dark. There was just vulnerability. A little girl who walked alone to a phone booth. A man who shouldn't have been trusted. And a world too busy, too blind, to notice the moment danger closed in. The story of Madison Leigh did not change laws. There was no sweeping legislation. No national reckoning. America had too many tragedies to hold them all. But it did change people. It made a few parents walk their children to school just one more week. It made a few teachers look harder when a student was too quiet. It made a few strangers at grocery stores ask, "Where's your grown-up, sweetheart?" And in those small moments, in those ripples unseen by headlines, Madison lived on. Kara once said, in the only recorded comment she ever gave after the trial, "I used to think pain was loud. Screaming, breaking things, falling apart. But real pain, it's quiet. It's walking into a room and forgetting she's not there. It's remembering the sound of her laugh, and not being able to remember what her last words were." She paused. "All I know is this. If you have someone you love, don't assume they'll be there tomorrow. Call them. Hold them. Show up." And then she stood up, adjusted the microphone, and walked off stage without another word. Some stories end with justice. Some with healing. Some with silence. This one ends with memory. A girl with a duck toy. A mother who never stopped loving her. And a world that forgot too quickly, but should never forget again.